Tonight, we uncover the chilling case of Delia Cross, a woman who was sentenced to life in prison, yet somehow, even behind bars, she never truly lost control. In Blackwood, Maine, nights were quiet, the quiet that made small towns feel safe. But safety was a matter of perspective. The forest stretched for miles, dense and unbroken, and the Atlantic crashed against the cliffs just beyond the harbor. Fog rolled in thick, swallowing the streets in the dead of night, muffling footsteps, hiding things that were never meant to be found. It started with a message. No name. No sender. Just a sentence sitting in Liam Rivers' inbox at 12:13 a.m. You don't belong here. At first, he barely reacted. Spam, he thought. A mistake. He swiped it away, forgetting it as he rolled over in bed. But the next night, at the same time, another one appeared. You were never supposed to be here. The words were strange but not threatening. Not really. It was easy to brush them off, until the third night. He never wanted you. That was the one that made Liam's stomach turn. For the first time, he hesitated before deleting it. He stared at the screen, waiting, almost expecting something more. A follow-up. An explanation. But nothing came, just that single sentence, sitting in the darkness, taunting him. He tried to move on. He did. But something about the messages sat wrong in his chest. He hadn't given them a second thought at first, but now. Now, they followed him into his dreams. He woke up at odd hours, his heart pounding, checking his phone before he was even fully conscious. And then they stopped. For 5 nights, nothing. No messages. No alerts. Just silence. He should have felt relieved. Instead, the absence felt worse, as if something was waiting. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. The moment that changed everything. A video. It was not a text or an email but a file on his phone. There was no sender or notification, it was just, there. When he opened it, his father's voice filled the room. I don't know how to tell him. He's not part of this family. I never wanted him here. Liam felt his breath catch. The video wasn't grainy or distorted. His father, Michael Rivers, was sitting at their kitchen table, the same kitchen where Liam had eaten breakfast every morning for years. It was the same chair where Michael always sat. His voice was calm, and his expression was unreadable. The words didn't make sense. They didn't belong to the man Liam had known his whole life. His father loved him. He was sure of it. But there he was, on the screen, saying it. Calm. Certain. Final. And then, just like that, the video vanished. Gone. No trace. Like it had never existed. Liam felt something cold settle in his stomach. He searched everywhere, gallery, downloads, cloud storage, but nothing. It was as if his phone was gaslighting him. That was when he stopped sleeping. He told himself it had to be a mistake. A trick. Some cruel prank. But the thoughts wouldn't stop. What if it was real? What if he had missed the signs? Had he been so desperate to belong that he hadn't seen the truth? He became restless. Jumpy. He watched his father's expression in a way he never had before, searching for hesitation. Distance. Proof. But proof of what? That the man who raised him secretly resented him. That everything he believed about his family was a lie. And still, the questions haunted him. Who sent the video? How had they put it on his phone? And more than anything, why? Even his professors noticed the change, the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he drifted through conversations. His best friend, Nate, was the first to say something. Liam, you're freaking yourself out over nothing. If something was wrong, your dad would tell you. But Liam wasn't so sure anymore. Because it wasn't just the messages, it wasn't just the video. It was the feeling. That growing, suffocating weight in his chest. That sense that something had shifted. That somewhere, out of sight, someone was watching. He started looking over his shoulder. He locked his bedroom door at night. He stopped trusting his instincts. And that was the point. Because this wasn't about scaring him. It was about breaking him down. Wearing him thin. Making him question everything so that when the final moment came, when the gun was raised and the trigger pulled, he wouldn't see it coming. The only problem? They got the wrong person. Liam Rivers was 20 years old. A college sophomore, full of plans, full of life. He was the kind of person who never let a bad day change how he treated others. He had a quiet kindness about him, an ease that made people feel safe in his presence. He was the friend who listened, the son who never missed a call home. The boy who, despite the weight of the world, always had a half-smile resting at the corners of his lips. He wasn't the loudest in the room. He didn't seek attention. But people noticed him anyway. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, unassuming but steady. Or perhaps it was how he made someone feel heard, even in the smallest of conversations. He grew up in a small town where everyone knew your name before you ever introduced yourself. His childhood was simple, weekend soccer games, fishing trips with his father, and sleepovers at Nate's house that always ended with the two talking until sunrise. Liam and Nate had been best friends since they were 8, the kind of friendship that felt more like family. They were inseparable, where one went, the other followed. They had survived every phase of growing up together, every heartbreak, every triumph. When college came, they ended up at the same university, sharing an off-campus apartment, still falling into the same rhythms they always had. It was the kind of friendship that felt untouchable. But even the strongest bonds can break. And that night, his dad. Because one night, Nate stood in the wrong place at the wrong time. And when the gun fired, the bullet that should have ended Liam's life tore through Nate's instead. The world shifted. Michael Rivers wasn't just Liam's father. He was his foundation. A man who built his life around providing for his son and protecting him. He was a sharp-minded businessman, respected in the community and private in a way that made people admire him. He carried himself with quiet authority, measured his words carefully, and never said more than necessary. But Michael's life changed the moment he met Delia Cross. She was striking in a way that made people turn their heads. But charm can be a distraction, and beauty can be a weapon. She walked into their lives like she belonged there, warm and inviting. But Liam always felt something just beneath the surface. There was a distance in her eyes when she looked at him, a sharpness to her smile when his father wasn't watching. Subtle, almost imperceptible. But he felt it. Deep down, he knew Delia didn't love him like Michael did. She didn't want him there. What Liam didn't know, no one knew, was that she wasn't just waiting for him to leave. She was planning it. Grief shapes people. Some carry it like a weight, an ache that never truly fades. Others bury it deep, forcing themselves forward. But for Delia Cross, grief was never a burden. It was a tool. A force she learned to wield, bending it to her will. The first time the town saw her cry was the night the fire took everything. It was a cold December evening. The kind where frost clung to the windows, and the air smelled like smoke long after the flames had been put out. The house was gone, charred wood, collapsed beams, a skeleton of what used to be a home. And inside, somewhere beneath the rubble, was her son. The neighbors stood in the street, watching firefighters sift through the remains. People whispered, shaking their heads and holding their children close. They said she had been downstairs when it happened. When she realized the fire had spread, it was already too late. But there were questions. Her son had been found in his bedroom, the door locked outside. Investigators struggled to explain it, but speculation was just speculation without evidence. No accelerant. There was no apparent foul play, just a tragedy. Delia stood there, wrapped in a borrowed coat, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She didn't wail. She didn't sink to the ground, overcome by grief. She cried, yes, but it was controlled. A single tear slid down her cheek as she nodded her condolences. People pitied her. They brought flowers and left handwritten notes on her doorstep. The town's tragedy became its burden, and as the months passed, Delia did what she had always done best, she moved forward. Then, one day, she was gone. No forwarding address. No goodbyes. Just an empty house and a town left wondering where she had disappeared. Some said she couldn't bear the memories. Others thought she had found family elsewhere. No one considered the possibility that she had simply been waiting for the right moment to start again. Years later, she returned. But this time, she wasn't alone. Michael Rivers wasn't the type to fall quickly. He was a sharp-minded businessman and a devoted single father who kept his world small, focused on one thing, protecting Liam. But Delia made people trust her. She carried herself with quiet grace, the kind that made her seem untouchable. Warm, soft-spoken, effortlessly slipping into Michael's life before anyone realized she had become a permanent fixture. They met at a charity gala. A brief conversation turned into dinner, which turned into late-night phone calls, long walks, and whispered laughter in quiet corners. It was a love story to outsiders, two people acquainted with loss finding solace in each other. But love was never what Delia wanted. Control was. She moved into their home, effortlessly stepping into the role of Michael's partner. She set the table for three, asked Liam about his classes, and smiled at him from across the room. To Michael, she was making an effort. To Liam, she was making a move. At first, it was subtle. She would pause when he entered a room as if recalibrating herself. She would tilt her head slightly when Michael spoke about him, measuring her words before responding. She never argued with him. She never raised her voice. But beneath her warmth, there was nothing but cold distance. He wasn't supposed to be there. She never said it out loud or tried to push him away directly. That wasn't her way. Delia didn't act on impulse, she was patient. And when the time came, she set the pieces in motion. The messages were the first step. An anonymous email here, a cryptic warning there. Nothing outright threatening, just enough to unsettle him. Just enough to make him feel like something was closing in. Then, the deep fake video. A fabricated recording of his father, his voice twisted into something cruel, a carefully crafted lie designed to shatter Liam's sense of security. By the time he started questioning his reality, she had already won. Liam was losing sleep. Second-guessing conversations. Feeling the walls close in around him. And Delia? She watched. She had done this before. She had lost a child once. And now, she was ready to do it again. Ivy Monroe was 19 years old and utterly alone. No family. No real friends. No one would notice if she disappeared. She had spent her childhood in the foster system, shuffled from home to home, each placement leaving her more hollow than the last. She learned early that love was conditional, that it could be given and taken away without warning. When she met Delia Cross, she stopped hoping for more. And then, Delia looked at her like she mattered. It started with kindness, soft words, gentle encouragement, the illusion of safety. Delia listened to Ivy's stories, nodding at the right moments, her eyes full of something Ivy had never seen before. "You've been let down a lot, haven't you?" Ivy hesitated, then nodded. "People always leave," Delia murmured, squeezing her hand. "They take what they need, and they move on. But I won't. I see you." Two little words. I see you. For a girl who had felt invisible, those words were everything. Ivy started spending more time with Delia. It felt natural at first, easy, like a mother and daughter should. Delia helped her pick out better clothes, bought her self-improvement books, and made her believe she was worth investing in. Then, the conversations shifted. Do you ever feel like some people don't deserve the life they have? Like they take, and don't even care who they hurt? Ivy never knew how to answer. Delia didn't need her to. She planted the thoughts, letting them take root until Ivy couldn't tell where they ended, and she began. Then, Delia gave her something new to hold on to, an enemy. Liam Rivers. He had everything Ivy never did, a father who loved him and a life full of opportunities. Yet Delia made it sound like he was wasting it. Michael's drowning because of Liam. He never says it, but I see it. He's tired. Exhausted. Liam is a weight around his neck. Ivy frowned. She had met Liam a handful of times. He didn't seem cruel. You don't see it because you're kind. But I see it. I hear it. Michael loves Liam because he has to, not because he wants to. Delia leaned in, voice thick with something Ivy couldn't quite place. Do you know what it's like to be unwanted? Yes. Yes, she did. Then you understand why this needs to stop. The text started soon after. Carefully worded messages that twisted Ivy's thoughts until they weren't her own anymore. He doesn't deserve this life. He's hurting Michael. You can fix this. And Ivy wanted to fix it. To help. To prove to Delia that she was worth keeping. So when Delia finally asked her to do something permanent, Ivy didn't hesitate. But she wasn't the only one being pulled apart. Liam Rivers was unraveling. The first email arrived late at night. An anonymous sender. A single line. You don't belong here. He stared at the screen, confused. It's a prank, probably. He ignored it. Then came another. You were never wanted. Then another. You're ruining his life. The words lingered. They felt personal. Then, the messages appeared in places no one should have access to, his phone and private accounts. He changed his passwords, but it didn't stop. Then came the deepfake recordings. The first time he heard it, he was in bed, scrolling through his phone. It was an audio file from an unknown number. His father's voice. I don't know how much longer I can do this. Liam's a burden. He's in the way. His stomach dropped. He sat up too fast, his vision blurring. He played it again. And again. His father wouldn't say that. He couldn't. But the voice was his. Liam barely slept that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, repeating the words in his head. The next day, he searched for an explanation. Maybe his dad had been venting to a friend. It could be out of context. Maybe. But then, another message arrived. A video. Shaking hands, he tapped to play. His father stood in the kitchen, speaking to Delia. I wish he would just disappear. Liam couldn't breathe. The ground beneath him tilted, slow and unsteady. Was he losing his mind? His father acted normal. Loving, even. But every time he spoke, Liam heard that voice. Every time they sat down for dinner, he wondered, was his father waiting for him to disappear? The paranoia grew. The exhaustion set in. And that was the plan. Delia wasn't just trying to destroy him. She wanted him to destroy himself. And if that didn't work, Ivy was waiting. Ivy Monroe had rehearsed this moment 100 times. The plan was simple. Quick. No hesitation. She would wait in the shadows, watch for Liam, and end this before he knew what was happening. That's what Delia told her. That's what had to happen. But standing there now, gun heavy in her hands, the world felt different than it had in her daydreams. The street stretched before her, empty except for the flickering glow of a street lamp. Her pulse pounded. Her breath came too fast. This wasn't a dream. This was real. Then, a figure appeared. Step steady. Shoulders hunched against the cold. Liam. It had to be Liam. Her fingers tightened around the gun. She could hear Delia's voice in her head, calm and guiding. He doesn't deserve this life. He's standing in the way of everything. You have to fix it, Ivy. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Breathe in. Hold. Exhale. The moment stretched, an eternity packed into a few unbearable seconds. Then, she pulled the trigger. The gunshot shattered the quiet night. The sound echoed off the buildings, swallowing everything else. The figure jerked back. A strangled sound escaped his lips. Ivy stood frozen, breath caught in her throat as the body collapsed onto the pavement. For a second, she felt weightless. It was done. Then, she stepped closer. A street light flickered, casting a dim glow over the fallen body. And her stomach dropped. It wasn't Liam. It was Nate. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading like ink across the asphalt. His hands clutched at his stomach, fingers slick with crimson. His chest rose and fell in jagged, uneven gasps. Ivy's breath hitched. Nate? His eyes flickered open, unfocused and glassy, searching for something, someone. His lips parted, the faintest whisper escaping. Ivy. Her knees hit the pavement. She pressed her hands against the wound, desperate to stop the bleeding. Warm, sticky liquid seeped through her fingers. It wouldn't stop. No, 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 her voice cracked, terror clawing up her throat. This wasn't, Nate's grip on her wrist tightened. His fingers trembled against her skin. Then, slowly, his hand fell away. His chest stilled. The world blurred. He was gone. A sob tore through her, but it got stuck somewhere deep inside, crushed beneath the weight of what she had done. Her phone buzzed. The sound snapped her back into the moment. With shaking hands, she pulled it out. The name on the screen made her stomach twist. Delia. Ivy swallowed hard and answered. It's done, she whispered. Silence. Then, I know. Ivy's breath caught. But, I shot the wrong one. Another pause. Then, the softest laugh. That's unfortunate. A cold shiver ran down Ivy's spine. What do I do? She pleaded. Delia, please, tell me what to do. More silence. Then, a soft click. The line went dead. Ivy stared at the phone, her breath shallow and ragged. She called back. No answer. Called again. Straight to voicemail. Delia was gone. A sound cut through the air, distant but growing closer. Sirens. Flashing lights painted the buildings red and blue. Ivy scrambled backward, hands shaking, mind racing. She had to run. She had to get out. Before she could move, hands grabbed her from behind. Voices. Yelling. Cold metal snapped around her wrists. Her body went limp. This wasn't supposed to happen. Delia had promised her. Delia had promised. But promises meant nothing. Because Delia was already erasing her next obstacle. For the police, the case seemed open and shut. The evidence was clear, and the confession was raw, desperate, and undeniable. Ivy Monroe had been caught at the scene, blood soaking through her sleeves, breath hitching between panicked sobs. She had fired the gun. She had taken a life. But some stories aren't meant to be tied up so neatly. And some people know exactly how to slip through the cracks. 200 miles away, a woman sat in a dimly lit apartment, scrolling through news reports. A glass of whiskey sat untouched beside her. Renee Carter wasn't just any journalist. She was the kind who never let go of a story, who kept digging long after the headlines had moved on. And she had been following Delia Cross for years. It started as a curiosity. A woman whose life had been marred by tragedy, first, the death of her only child in a house fire, then the sudden loss of an ex-boyfriend in a fall that seemed just a little too perfect. The world pitted Delia, a grieving mother, a survivor, and a woman who rebuilt her life after devastation. But Renee had a nagging feeling. Some people attract tragedy. Others create it. And Delia Cross? Elijah Cross. Delia's son. Ivy swallowed hard and turned the page. A charred house. Blackened walls. Smoke-stained windows. The remains of a life burned away in the dead of night. Then, the report. The words blurred, but one sentence stood out like a blade pressed against her throat. No evidence of forced entry. No accelerants detected. Fire deemed accidental. Her breath caught. She flipped through more pages, her heart beat a dull roar in her ears. Testimonies from neighbors. The fire's timeline. The fact that Delia had been outside when it happened. The realization hit like ice in her veins. Elijah hadn't been a victim. Delia had let him burn. The woman Ivy had worshipped. The woman she had trusted. She had killed before. She would do it again. Ivy shoved back from the table, her chair scraping against the floor. Her breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. She had thought she was protecting Delia. But Delia had never needed protection. She needed control. 2 days later, the police arrived at Delia's home. A sprawling estate. Pristine. Untouched by the chaos she had left behind. She answered the door with a soft smile, her expression calm, almost expectant. "Good evening, officers." Her voice was smooth, unshaken, like she had been waiting for this moment all along. The cuffs clicked around her wrists. The charges were read. Murder. Conspiracy. Manipulation. She didn't flinch. She didn't argue. Because Delia Cross had spent her entire life preparing for this. Across the street, Renee Carter stood with a notepad in hand, watching as Delia was led away. The journalist in her should have felt satisfied. She had chased this story for years. Now, the villain was getting what she deserved. But something was wrong. Delia's eyes flicked up, meeting Renee's from across the pavement. And for just a second, there was something there. Not fear. Not remorse. Something else. Something calculated. Something dangerous. Like a woman who already knew exactly how this story would end. Justice is supposed to bring closure. A gavel slams. A sentence is handed down. The world moves on. But some cases don't end when the handcuffs click shut. Some stories linger. Delia Cross was sentenced to life without parole. No appeals. No second chances. She would die in a prison cell. That should have been the end of her story. And yet, something never felt finished. Inside those walls, Delia lived like a woman untouched by consequences. She never raised her voice. Never fought. She didn't need to. She had always preferred to let others get their hands dirty. Even now, she had admirers, women drawn to her charm, intellect, and ability to make them feel seen. Delia had a gift. She could make people trust her. Make them believe their darkest thoughts were nothing to be ashamed of. That they were misunderstood. Just like her. And Ivy? Ivy Monroe sat in a different prison, serving time for a crime she committed, for a life she never controlled. She was 19 when she fired the gun. A girl abandoned by her mother, desperate for approval. For belonging. Delia had found her at her weakest and whispered just the right words in the right way. And Ivy had listened. Now, she would pay for it. For the rest of her life. But what about Delia? In her final court appearance, the day the judge handed down her sentence, she didn't tear up. She didn't beg for mercy. She just smiled. Not a smirk. Not arrogance. Something quieter. Something worse. Like someone watching the final piece of a puzzle fall into place. Like someone who had planned for this. Michael Rivers had tried to move on. He sold his house. He changed his number. Left town. But memories don't disappear. The love letters Delia had written to him were still in a box at the back of his closet. The old voicemails from Liam end with, "Love you, Dad." Words that cut like glass every time he replayed them. Then, one day, an envelope arrived. No return address. Just his name, written in a careful, looping script. Inside was a single piece of paper. "You were always so easy to fool." No signature. No explanation. But he didn't need one. He recognized the handwriting instantly. Delia Cross was still playing the game. Still watching. Still controlling. Because prison bars don't break people like Delia. She had spent years perfecting the art of manipulation. Warping reality. Twisting minds. Pulling strings from the shadows. And if she could do that in the outside world, who's to say she couldn't do the same from behind bars? Maybe Ivy wasn't the last person she would mold into a weapon. Maybe she had already found another. Because people like Delia, they don't stop. They don't regret it. They don't disappear. So, the real question isn't whether justice was served. It's whether she ever truly lost. Or if this was just another move in a game she knew how to play. Some stories end with a gavel strike, a prison sentence, and the illusion of justice. A killer is locked away. The case is closed. And the world convinces itself the danger is over. But every so often, a story lingers. Not because of what was proven, but because of what was left unanswered. Delia Cross sat in that courtroom, listening to the testimonies, the evidence, the accounts of manipulation and murder. She barely reacted when Ivy sobbed on the witness stand. She didn't flinch when the jury returned the verdict. And then, as the judge sentenced her to life in prison, she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not a smirk. Not defiance. Satisfaction. Like someone watching the final piece of a puzzle fall into place. The cameras caught it. The reporters mentioned it. But no one could explain it. Because here's the thing about Delia Cross, she never worked alone. She had Ivy. Before that, she had Michael Rivers pulled into her orbit. And before him, there were others. People who followed her until they became expendable. So, the question isn't whether Delia was guilty. It's whether she was done. Weeks after her conviction, Michael Rivers found a letter in his mailbox. No return address. No signature. Just a single, typewritten sentence, "Loyalty never dies." Maybe it was nothing. Or it could be a warning. Because even behind bars, Delia Cross was still pulling the strings. And if there's one thing we know for sure, people like Delia, they don't stop. They don't disappear. They find new voices to whisper in. New hands to do their bidding. New pawns. So tell me, is Delia's story truly over? Or is this just the beginning of another game? If you want more stories like this, subscribe. Because in the world of true crime, some names never fade. Some cases never close. And some people never stop watching.